We're going to have a quick webinar today where we introduce people to the idea of contextual or purposeful experiences on the Adobe Experience Manager, otherwise known as your content management system. So I'm Dave Haggerty, and this is Steven. Steve, maybe you can introduce yourself real quick.
Thanks, David. I'm Steven Pfaff, Director of Enterprise Architecture at R2I. Got over 10 years of experience helping enterprise companies build the solution of their dreams.
What we're going to try to discuss today is the idea of AEM, formerly known as CQ5. It's a legendary content management system, one of the originals in the sense of history, right? When we used to build static websites, Steven, back in the day, not many people probably thought that the same product suite would be used 20 years later to build content as a service factories, content, distribution, omni-channel, all the fancy words we use today. But one thing I'd like to ask you, Steven, is somebody who's implementing and deploying this on a daily basis. When you think of AEM as a foundation, what is the most important thing in your mind as an architect that needs to be taken into consideration? So someone goes and they see you and I give an AEM demo. We show up on day one. What do you think is the first thing we should be explaining to them is required before we start to deploy the art of the possible, right? Whatever we gave them in the demo.
Yep.
Maybe you could speak to that a bit.
Yeah. So really one thing I like to address very upfront is really understanding the organizational structure in addition to their goals. Both of those things are pivotal and have huge impacts on the project if you don't fully suss those out at the time of discovery. That discovery phase is everything. It leads into content strategy. It defines what's going to integrate with what and what's the business purpose behind what they're building. So this gets into a little bit of purpose built, what we sell as the art of possible, right, David? So we can get into the art of the possible and really delivering what is purpose built and how to engineer things the way they should be before you actually start the development.
Well, I think that, so for me, that content strategy or organizational structure is key. Right. So when we're purpose built into this, so I'm going to take a step back, right? We used to build websites that were one for many. Everyone would arrive at the website and it wasn't really purpose built other than for ourselves. It was our sort of brochureware. Then we went into the world of one to few or one to, a small group of demographic profiles. Are you East Coast or West Coast? And then we would design the website to fit that geographic region, thinking that was personalization. That somehow everyone from Boston had the same interest, that everyone from San Diego had the same interests. And that wasn't the case. And now we live in a world where it's one-to-one. And if you don't have a content strategy that understands Steven from David, they have a lot of interests. They're both guys who love content management. They're both guys who love Hawaiian shirts, but we have other interests. So you can't make that assumption that the content for Steven will always be applicable for David. So talk to us a little bit about content strategy. Where do you start with that? Is it the content layout or is it the idea of who's getting it when and where?
Well, it's funny you bring up the way things used to be and from an architectural standpoint, everything used to be like your single HTML file was your web page.
Right.
And slowly, as these systems evolved, I think people started using blogging engines and things that are based on PHP and open source technology. Slowly, the HTML page began to fracture. So now you have a database that represents the content on a page, and you might have assets and then a user interface to pull things together. With enterprise platforms, everything is even more fractured. But the benefit to you is you have the flexibility to use all of these different functions of your content for a variety of use cases. So again, to answer your question, what do I like to address with the approaching a company about their content strategy would be breaking apart the main pieces of the AEM puzzle and defining how things should be laid out. What are your organizational goals? What are the security implications that need to be built into this? Like, do you have a parent company with underlying operating companies, and each of them needs to have separate access to the single platform, but should not be cross collaborating or have access to see or view things. So a lot of these things play into the content strategy, especially at the top of that layer. Like, what is the site? How should it be laid out? where do the assets live? This is kind of going down a different path, because what content strategy is could be pages, can be assets, can be your tag taxonomy. It can be marketing content that gets attributed to your product data, you name it.
So I think it's interesting that you brought up the HTML concept, right? So I'll age myself. I used to build Cold Fusion, right, websites, and the Cold Fusion tag was essentially my page structure, right? I would have the beginning of a Cold Fusion page, I'd have the end, and inside I'd have body, and I'd have advertisement, or I might have image.
Yep.
When you talk about that modern strategy and the idea of reuse, I don't want to get into headless yet, but this idea of creating snippets or components. So instead of building a full structured HTML page, I'm noticing, and maybe you could speak to this, that people now want this dynamic capability where they have control on the layout, but instead of us publishing full pages, we now publish component fragments, or experience fragments, as Adobe calls it. And then to your statement, they're tagged so that the guy from Boston, the lady from San Diego can have the appropriate content executed to them. So how important is that idea when going through the requirements and understanding the reuse? Where do you start? Is it content reuse? Is it, content? Go ahead.
Yeah. That breaks into a little bit down the chain in the organizational content strategy, and what are the business objectives? So if your business objective is to be able to market and attribute certain actions from the end user on particular pages, and hey, I have this teaser. Well, we're going to use this teaser across several brand sites that live under this one website. How do you do that efficiently so your marketers aren't reauthoring content day in and day out? Well, that's a good use case for an experience fragment. Like, you can build that initial experience, extrapolate it into an experience fragment, push it to target, have it live on your AM web page. You can even do things such as like build an interface at a server side, an API interface that allows another application to come in and start reusing the experience fragment with its own designs. There's any number of things you can do. You've essentially taken a chunk of the website out of the website while allowing it to function as if it was still living in that website.
So that, for me, then that immediately, I don't know if I take it out of the website, but my first thought when you stated that was the idea of PIM, or product information, or e-commerce style integration, where someone has a website, but they embed, if you will, their e-com app inside of the page. Previously, we would build an iframe, and we would kind of, quite honestly, bubblegum and Band-Aid overlap one functionality on top of another, and that would not work very well. So moving forward with AEM, we would start to do these sort of what I would call clean integrations, where we would pull information from the PIM or the e-com site and now naturally render them inside of that component template. Is that something you see more today in the sense of a native integration, i.e. we're pulling content from a third party? Or do you recommend that people maintain this sort of two systems running concurrently iframe model? How do you like to sort of talk that through with people?
It's not always a content strategy discussion when you're bringing in like things like PIM and e-commerce in the conversation. We talk about data strategy. You might get in, the best place to start there that I've done with other customers is really build a data model. And that data model includes things like who's responsible for what, not just at an organizational standpoint, but at an application standpoint. What system is responsible for what is the purpose of that data? So where AEM fits in more and more these days is the common approach or integration pattern, if you will, is having AEM serve as a glass. Let it drive the marketer journey for that end user all the way up until checkout. And all of the individual product pieces, we call them highly transactional data points, are still driven and owned by that e-commerce system, whether that's your price, your product catalog even. So AEM's able to integrate with those things much easier with the commerce integration framework. These become data points that are attached to your content. And the way that's achieved is really through ID associations to your content. So just by one small modification to your pages and assets, you now have a field that allows you to attribute an immutable ID from e-commerce, PIM, It can be any data platform though. It's not specific. And really drive a sort of association across your content. And that gives you a ton of power when you start talking about associative content.
Well, now you're talking true personalization, right? Where you can understand how content has been used in the past. I love the idea of the single pane of glass. So if I'm a marketer and I want to build experiences, sometimes I'm in the Creative Cloud and Adobe's Creative Cloud using Illustrator, Photoshop, Dreamweaver, whatever it might be in that suite. And then people sometimes forget that natively plugs into AEM. Well, you've just extended it where someone who's building content for the PIM system or the e-com site doesn't necessarily think in the context always of a website, right? But now that content, I believe, can be repurposed on different channels. So Stephen visits the website, looks at a particular product, and then lo and behold, that next email he receives or she receives has that product information in there. Is that sort of an example where you're extending the experience by using data? Would that be a fair statement to make?
Yeah, exactly. That's a great use case. Take it one step further. You can attribute a product ID from product catalog living in your PIM system to a particular product page. That product page now becomes your point of publication. When is your product live? Well, when the public can view some information about the product, usually that starts with your marketing copy. Right. So a product detail page or a PDP is created with an AM. It's associated to a product ID. The assets that are critical for that product page, like your product thumbnail, also get tagged with your product ID. Now your product page can pull in that asset dynamically because it's able to see that association within the AM system. But going one step further, you can now start to think about how do these pieces of content and these assets serve other systems outside of AM, because now AM is becoming this sort of arbiter for the marketing journey. It's the point of publication. So now that when AM's published, we know we can start activating on all these other systems. So product page is activated, that product's live, sync the asset to, a separate fulfillment system, Amazon FBA for one instance. Maybe you need your product specs on that page. Now you have that ID to attribute to other ERP systems. Mm-hmm. You can push your product thumbnail upstream, let the DAM be the owner of your marketing content, which includes your product imagery. The options are really, really endless. We're talking very specifically to e-commerce, but this can be just general data management systems that might include information about the business, the employees within the business, you name it. We've done integrations all over the place.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the idea of e-com, because I'm hung up on this idea that we've entered the age of authenticity. We are no longer in the age of personalization, which meant we carpet bombed everyone with what we believe they wanted to see. We took a very presumptuous approach, I think, to the one to few approach to content management. When we now build these content fragments and we can now use data to identify individuals, this idea for me of atomic components being used to now serve up non-transactional moments. So what I mean by that is if you know that someone's birthday is nearby, or if you know somebody just purchased a product, you don't have to recommend the next best product. You could actually now serve up to them things that are self-service, reducing the cost of their sort of onboarding with your partner. Think of cars or think of a refrigerator. Yes, you bought a car and maybe you need new tires, but wouldn't it be wonderful if someone just sent you the manual and said, thank you for becoming an owner of our product. Here's the user manual. There's an old Dogbert moment when I was in tech support where someone would call tech support and say, I don't know how to use the computer. And Dogbert would step up on the desk and say, can anyone read the manual? Right. And I think that is something that's been lost. We buy products, but we're not being enabled. Do you see that as well, where I think AEM has really allowed people to build this authentic experience by serving up content to people that's relevant, contextual, without it always having to be transactional? I will buy things from you, but I don't necessarily want it, forced down my throat. And when we do this sort of recommendation, like, Stephen, you just bought this awesome thing. Did you know that this manual might help you use it better? Right now, that feels to me at least authentic and personalized. Well, what's your take on that? This idea of not always forcing up a recommendation, but giving somebody a contextual, authentic experience?
Well, I will always say data will speak for you. So obviously, if you know your customers from a data standpoint, you know how to sell to them. But that said, as you pointed out, things are changing fast in the digital ecosystem, and how we evolve really the content strategy from a funnel standpoint. We used to like to build these really narrow funnels that we try to peg you for what industry you might be in or what brand that you're interested in. And then we just serve you marketing funnel until we get to where you want to go. Why not just find a way to skip right to the end? Figure out who that user is. So whether it's whether they're logged in or not, we start to attribute information from the experience that you have on the website. So it's really, I guess, kind of circling back. It's really about capturing those insights and figuring out how to dial them for your customer base or your audience. So AEM works really well as an integration platform. It is sort of the axle of the wheel where all these other products now become spokes that allow the wheel to turn, but it's not, it's no longer designed for a pool of people or a global audience. It's designed for individuals. You got to know your customer. The data will tell you who your customer is. And once you know those things, you can build a one-to-one system efficiently. Then I
love the wheel analogy, right? So this idea of the flywheel, right?
Yep.
As it's building momentum, it's actually building power. So if you take your original comment, you and I give a demo and we show somebody a piece of content on a website, on a direct mail piece, and on an email, and they say, we want that today. And then we say, okay, well, it's not a pizza. It doesn't come out of the box, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take a step back and understand, what are you trying to do with whom? Let's identify the people and the content strategy for them on their journey, to your point. It's no longer if they arrive, then give them this. If they don't respond, tell them to leave, right? We need to take not a brand approach, but a customer-centric approach, a Steven approach or a David approach. And I think that flywheel now begins to build momentum, where the data allows us to serve up content based on what we believe you're looking for. As you show us more activity, we can make assumptions on where you might be going. And now the flywheel is sort of saying, well, don't send that, suppress that content. He's already purchased the product. What he needs is the manual, right? And now suddenly that flywheel builds momentum. And I think that's a great analogy for AEM, which is if you build that structure of content at an atomic level, if you build the tags so that the structure and the content now have purpose, then when you apply business rules and execution on channel, it feels natural, right? I think that's a hard thing to do. Maybe you could speak to that. Like, is that a struggle for people to understand, Steven, in your experience, this idea that we don't just build a website, we have to take a step back and actually design how are those components created or designed?
Yeah, it's absolutely a content engine, and it requires more than just AEM to achieve it. So AEM is great at being that center point, but you need other systems, be it analytics target, to speak lightly, but even getting into customer data platforms, the entire world opens up to you as far as what you can capture and what you can attribute from a user-to-user perspective. So it is a challenge because a lot of customers haven't reached the technical maturity to where they have these systems in place. And if they are quickly jumping to it, they might, choose a product quickly without thinking about the overall goal. Like, don't focus on just the website. Like, do you have a mobile app? Do you have other e-commerce platforms that have to be served by the needs of this system? So it is a challenge, and it's always a challenge, even for me. And that's really the fun of what I get to do, is work with customers and kind of figure out what are all the players here? What applications do you have today? What kind of, leverage do we have to bring in things like a CDP or an enterprise search application, maybe some machine learning. And then we can start tying these systems together. We have, like you mentioned, tags at a very basic level within AEM. We can start using even tiny fragments of information that are maybe hidden to the user on the website, but we can tie them back to, like, hey, this user's constantly interacting with this brand's content or this industry of content. and then even go further down that to product category, subcategory. And then when you get to the website search, now we have all this information about you at a user level, whether you're authenticated or not. We can start doing things like you mentioned before. Someone comes to the website, we already know you own this product, and we know you've come back here for information on maintenance. Here's the parts list, or here's the instruction manual. We can start to boost and bury things on the search. Or we know that your product's 6 years old. You come back to the website, we're able to use that information from a segment standpoint and start telling you, hey, there's a new product out there. This is going to be relevant for you, and here's why.
Yeah. And I love that idea that we get hung up on the website. You know, you and I hear it every day, which is we want to do a website redesign. And the first question typically you and I would say is, well, do you ever use that content on email or in a display ad on LinkedIn or Facebook? And they, well, yeah, we do. But what's that got to do with our website? And it's like, well, how are you going to have a customer journey? How are you going to be authentically speaking with contextual awareness if when I go to the website, the next email I get has nothing to do with what I was just doing, right? So you clearly don't know me, or you have these siloed machines doing things that are channel specific. And I find that in today's world, when you look at the Googles or if you look at Google as an example, Alphabet, right? They know who you are, both on YouTube and Google, and they're trying their best, I believe, to render up things that are contextually aware. Well, if you take the scale of that company and you break it down at a lower level, when they compete in verticals, so think of when they were selling insurance, for instance, in Europe, they were dominating the market. Why? Not because they sold good insurance, because they knew that Stephen and David maybe owned a car or a truck, or they knew that they were interested in a family plan, right? So the idea of being able to attach the content and the awareness to an experience versus just serving it up on a platter, I think is a real challenge, because the competition today typically does have data that they can learn from. And if companies are not thinking that if companies don't get out of the mindset that the website is one thing and somehow email and e-com are separate, then eventually they'll fail, I believe. I don't know if you agree or disagree, but
wholly agree. And I think the trust that you're building there, and really the risk of attrition, could even be more strongly attributed in the business to business. So I know a lot of the terms we're using are business to direct to consumer type commerce, but this really is, we're speaking holistically. Like if you have a business to business website or a portal, AM can be that application for your portal and serve all these things and start enabling, like offer enablement or bid enablement. And you can start doing some of those things to get to know your business partners better, make sure that they feel like they're a part of your organization. And I've seen several cases of that where AM is sort of tied almost at the hip with the CRM platform, right, where you have your business users that have different tiers of partnership, they have a role within the company. All of these data points circle back into the marketing platform, which is really enabling them to do business for your business much better. Like,
I think that for me, that's spot on, where people are saying, well, you guys are talking about consumerism, or you're talking B2C. We're a B2B company. We're different. And it's like, yeah, you are different. And we're going to show you how you can enable the sales team. You don't have to build the content so that they serve up a recommendation. You want to use analytics and target to make sure that they are having the contextual awareness, in the sense of we're talking the same product, but then you take that site visit, you take that email open, and you go into your CRM and you check off, Stephen has arrived today and he read the email and then he read the manual online. Well, for the salesperson, that might mean make a phone call, right? So I'm noticing that we're doing a lot of these portal of the future sort of approaches with B2B companies, and it's really a sales enablement and a cost reduction play. Right. Yep. As long as someone doesn't call up and ask for tech support on how to fix the thing.
Right.
Right. And the salesperson can be predictive or anticipatory. Now AEM, or your content management system, is really enabling the sales team. It's cutting costs because it's truncating things that aren't relevant, or more importantly, it's suppressing advertising that is not required. I bought a product. Don't send an advertisement to that person on that product. Right. And those are things that I feel people on the B2B side may not be aware that AEM can help them solve for. right?
Yeah, the concepts are holistic. They apply to everything. So, we do like to talk about things from a commerce perspective, but it is really a holistic approach, and the actions may change in the end. Like we might be doing offers and bids, or enablement from a business to business perspective. But the way that the data interacts and flows through these systems is very much going to be similar. And you still go through the same content strategy exercise. You go through your same data modeling exercise. So it's a lot of those same processes will come into play. And it's really just figuring out who your customer is, who your audience is, and how to best serve them.
So I think that's a great way to close this call and set up our next one, which is we come back and we show people now in the next series our sort of pocket demo, right, Stephen? And we show them how we take a content structure, we associate it with tags, we activate it or electrify it with data, right? And then we execute that. So I love the idea of data or insights plus design or creative plus channel equals experience. Because nobody's trying to build a website. No one's trying to just send out an email. They're trying to create an experience that's relevant to individuals. And I think we have sort of the algorithm or the secret sauce. Take your insights, tie it to a creative design, tell us what channel you want it delivered on, and we'll do that with purpose. And we call that purposeful experiences or contextual awareness. And that might be a great way for us to follow up with this podcast, if you will, or this webinar is let's show you that art of possible, but now let's take everything we've talked about today and practically apply it.
I love that. And I'm gonna steal that. Actify.
I make up words sometimes. It's what we do on webinars. Well, with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us. I'm here with my colleague, Stephen Pfaff, and we look forward to talking with you all soon.